Welcome back everyone to 40K Fireside. It's your host Vik with you today, and we are going to be talking about a topic which I think is not spoken about enough. And I wanted to share with you my thoughts about how game balance is so heavily influenced nowadays by 40K win rates. Let's get into it. Welcome to the 40K Fireside podcast, where we discuss everything to do with competitive Warhammer 40K with your hosts Vik VJ and David Gaylord. Okay, let's get straight into it. So first of all, I want to have a little discussion about the evolution of statistics in Warhammer 40K. About 6 or 7 years ago, a couple of guys in Canada made a website called 40kstats.com, which really gave us our first taste of how powerful collecting data from tournaments was and then providing analysis. These guys had a YouTube channel that ran at the end of the week talking about tournaments coming up on the weekend, and in the middle of the week talking about the results from those tournaments. It stimulated huge amounts of discussion in a way we just weren't doing before that. Before, it was much more about emotions, finding those lists that were more powerful than everything else, and actually not really having any objective data to realize what was doing too well and what really wasn't doing very well. The 40K Stats website ended up giving us a lot of information that we were missing before. That has obviously evolved now, and I want to give a huge shout out to the guys at StatCheck who've created a phenomenal website as well as a phenomenal podcast. Definitely go check them out. I am going to be using a lot of their information from their brilliant meta dashboard to make some of the points and start off some of the discussion about the things which make me a little bit concerned about how important win rate has become for community discussion on game balance, and probably more worrying how important it is for Games Workshop when it comes to their game balance. We're starting to see in the Warhammer community meta update articles, Games Workshop talk about win rates, things being inside a healthy win rate band. And this healthy win rate band is my very first point that I want to chat about. So a healthy band is between 45 to 55% win rate. That is from game theory. That is the arbitrary amount that we have decided on as a community, and Games Workshop has decided on from a corporate level, is the healthy level of balance, where if your army or a faction sits in this level, it is good and balanced. The problem is, for example, in the meta that we're in at the moment, where the game I think is phenomenally balanced, we end up with a situation where we're trying to compare data within a very narrow percentage difference of win rates, which are all sitting within a healthy band. So, for example, this is from the StatCheck website. This is such a good presentation of information. This is about the last 6 weeks of win rate data on their website. What we have on the screen here is all of the factions represented by different symbols and their win rates, where the higher up they are on the y-axis, so vertically on this particular presentation, the higher their win rate. And the further across the x-axis, the more games have been played. So you can kind of see the factions which are really, really popular. So we've got a couple of issues here, obviously. We've got, Death Guard and Imperial Knights being very, very popular and being right up against that win rate barrier of 55%. Now, the problem comes when you try to decide within this that, okay, Tau have a slightly higher win rate than Custodes. That means Tau are more powerful. That is not necessarily always the case. So if, for example, we switch over to this graphic here, which shows a week-by-week win rate analysis between two of my favorite factions, the Sisters of Battle, the Adeptus Sororitas, and Eldari. Now, on this screen, we can see at the start that Adeptus Sororitas have a really nice high win rate of 56%, and they're up over here. And then the very next week, they drop below Eldar. Now, in your mind, does that mean that Sisters of Battle were the more powerful faction than Eldar this week, and then all of a sudden, actually Eldar are way more powerful? The issue I have with just using win rate when they're all within the healthy band and within a few percentage of each other is that actually week by week we don't have enough tournament games to really come to good conclusions about the differentiating power levels of armies. And when you only look at win rate, I think you lose a huge amount of context. Let's move on to StatCheck's main website here. So on their main website, we have a whole load of information. So on the side of the screen here, you can see what is over the last 8 weeks of data. So this is kind of when Chapter Approved came out. It might be about 10 weeks. And we've got the armies listed down this left-hand side. And then we've got their win rates as the very first column. And on this, you can see that Imperial Knights, GSC, Death Guard, Chaos Knights, with 3 of those, so Chaos Knights, Death Guard, and Imperial Knights really being what people have been calling the big 3. And the statistics do show that they are the armies with the highest win rate here. There are other armies sitting all the way in the middle, where, for example, let's take Eldari. Eldari are down here with 51%, but if you look at a lot of the discussion about Eldari, you'll see that a lot of people think Eldari are a really powerful army. They're one of the best armies in the game. It's not really being reflected in their win rate here, which is super interesting. Eldari are a really popular faction, but they're not really competing with the same level of percentage win rate as some of these other armies at the top. So what we really need is to look at context, reasons why some armies are performing better than others in win rate, and going back to the point I'm making, the first pitfall you can do when we're talking about win rate is that actually little percentage differences, particularly week by week or over a very small set of data, mean absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter that Eldar have got 55% this week, 52% last week. You only talk about Eldar this week, whereas last week you weren't even bringing them into the discussion. The key thing I think we should be looking at is things where armies majorly overperform with their win rate. Those are the times where I think win rate on its own really shines. So let's jump into that and see if we can get a little bit of data from the StatCheck website, which might be interesting to that discussion. So let's move back to looking at Sisters and Eldari. And instead of looking at them over a 4-week period, let's move on to looking at them over the entire time the 10th edition has been alive. So let's hit all over here and we'll get this graphic up for you. We can see at the start of 10th edition, we are no longer sitting in our nice little band of 45 to 55%. Sisters started in there, but they absolutely dropped off a cliff in that area. And then Eldar started way up here. This is a win percentage of more than 60%, extending to over 70%. Now, I remember when 10th edition first came out, I saw the previews and I said, this army is going to be absolutely broken based on the rules. And when an army is truly broken, we've got to be careful how we throw around the word broken. I know sometimes I do it, I fall victim to that, but when we actually mean something is broken and not just a little bit too strong or just strong but not overpowered, broken is what we can see on the screen here, is how Eldar started off 10th edition being extremely oppressive. Now, the way that win rates work when high win rate army plays a low win rate army, even small percentage increases in win rate relative to the other one result in massively increased chance of the army with the higher win rate winning. Because win rates are done on an entire meta, but when you look at it faction to faction, the disparity between armies is much greater. So when armies hit such high levels of win rates, so let's say 60, 70% plus, they become a massive problem to the meta. People are winning at the game when skill has been taken out and you're only winning because you're playing a very, very strong army. Now, the same thing kind of works in reverse. So we're looking at the massive strength of Eldar here at the start of 10th edition, but also the massive weakness of Sisters when people were still trying to work out what were the good builds with Sisters. This timeline explains so many stories here. Eldar ended up taking a sequence of nerfs which brought their win rate down. Fate dice became limited in the amount of times you could use them. Devastating wounds, the mortal wounds didn't spill over anymore. So that brought the Eldar win rate down, still above the 55%. Now, Sisters had a very different story. Sisters and their context for their win rate here was that at the start of the edition, there was a podcast called Sister Act, and this podcast really joined together a lot of Sisters enthusiasts. They kind of blew up here because Sisters suddenly had a lot of really good players starting to investigate the particular units that were in there and see if they could find some combinations that worked. So week on week, we were about 12 weeks, kind of 3 months into the meta, and all of a sudden people realized, wait a second, why don't I take a whole bunch of Arcoflagellants in my list? Sisters actually have pretty decent rules. Let's try and use them. And week on week, you saw an increase with very minimal, there were a few points changes, very minimal changes in rules to Sisters. And then they ended up sitting right in that healthy band. And they progressed to go even higher when their codex eventually came out. So little spikes like this is related to a codex coming out, and the Sisters codex was pretty strong. The Sisters Codex came out at a similar time when Eldar were taking a sequence of nerfs and ended up kind of falling into a very balanced pattern towards the middle of the 50% win rate. The story is really interesting and really cool to follow. I think my main takeaways from this are that, you know, everything that sits in this 45 to 55% win rate band, you can't really differentiate between the stuff. But when things get really crazy, that kind of 70% win rate or right down to towards the 35% win rate, that's when armies really have problems and they need a bit of help. And I think that's our single best use of win rate data. So yeah, that's going to be talking about point number 2, which is, you know, really win rates are going to be used when armies are significantly overpowered. Anytime when you look at an army that has really captured the attention of our balanced discussions, be that Mordaka, be that kind of the Slanesh demons, or if you go back to 9th edition, we had Drukhari who came out, absolutely blitzed the meta, Custodes, Tau, we had a sequence of them, then we had all of those indirect orc guns. All of these armies were hitting win rates of 65, 70%, which is a massive problem for the meta. But where we are now with the highest win rate army being at 57%, I think that's actually a pretty low amount. And the difference between these armies, maybe the level of passion in the discussion don't quite match just how much stronger these armies are, which is not very much. Obviously, I do understand that everyone wants to play a perfectly balanced game. It's really hard to do that when new broken stuff keeps coming out or new really strong stuff keeps coming out. But I'm doing this video to highlight some of the discussion you hear on Reddit is a little emotional when it comes to win rates. StatCheck does use some really interesting data here. StatCheck not only keeps win rates here, but they do something else, which I think is super, super useful when it comes to discussing statistics in 40K, which is this overrepresentation, which I think is huge. So overrepresentation is how much of that army is being played relative to how well it's doing. So if you have a faction which has 100% of the players at a tournament, you would expect 100% of them to be top 4. In the same way, if 50% of the players at a tournament were playing Imperial Knights, you'd expect 50% of them to do really well, be in the top 50% of rankings of that tournament. Now, overrepresentation is set at 1 when that matches correctly. As an army does better than it should, the overrepresentation goes above 1. So we can see Imperial Knights at 1.44, Death Guard really high, 1.77 here. And then you get other armies. Let's go see where Eldar are. Eldar were 0.8, so they're not quite doing as well as they're represented. But we still need a lot of context with this. So in terms of context, there are armies like, let's take Drukhari. Look at their overrepresentation. It's super high, but really a lot of people struggle to do well with Drukhari, except for one guy, Skari, who really pushes the win rates up. If you have a look at my video about 5 ways to become better at competitive 40k, I do talk about how some of the top players really skew a lot of the statistics when it comes to Warhammer 40k, because in that context, I was talking about skill and how important skill is. In this context, when some people have close to 90% win rates, they're obviously going to skew win rates when the win rates are around 50%, and these armies sometimes have very low player numbers. So overrepresentation, while useful hand in hand with win rates, is also still not absolutely perfect. Then we have our next point, which is about using statistics to justify points of view on game balance. Now, I have fallen a little bit victim to discussing this, we all have our biases. I love my Thousand Sons, my Eldar, my Sisters of Battle, and regardless of what the win rate and the statistics say, I kind of sometimes have my opinion on it. But let's take Eldar, for example. Now, there is an amazing resource called Meta Monday, which comes out on Reddit every week, and I think phenomenal. The way the information is collated is great. But it is done by one single person who ends up writing some descriptions about kind of what they think their analysis is. And I'll see if I can pop up a little bit over here. Cool. So this is some of their analysis over here from a few weeks back. And in this analysis, they say Eldari won the biggest event of the weekend and another event. With a 45% weekend win rate, it seems more players are trying them out as they have seen success recently, and over the last 8 weeks they have a nice 48% win rate, but have won 12 events, which ties them with CK as the third most event wins. Now, tell me you read that without seeing some of the biases there, because depending on what your bias is towards a certain army, let's say you play the army, let's say you play Death Guard here, you can kind of mask some information in there. For example, I could write that little bit of fluff saying they have a 58% weekend win rate, but they have a huge proportion of players, 10.2%, which means they are more likely to win most of the events. Same with Eldar. You could highlight the 45% weekend win rate here. You could highlight the third most event wins. You could add extra describing things saying how they seem to be having more success. You can put the word nice before a 48% win rate. Now, props to the author of Meta Monday, because he does write, I have a bias against Eldar, so anytime they do anything a little more, they're going to come up in discussion. Anytime they're not doing so well, they're not really going to show up in any of the analysis. The point I am trying to make with this is that you can really find any statistics to justify the point of view you have on game balance. And we're going to see that in a lot of content creation where people will make their tier lists or their balance discussion, ourselves included, based on their points of view regardless of statistics, and could easily find statistics to justify that point of view. Now, it's important that we realize that armies can be strong even if the statistics don't show it. Eldar is a really great example of this. There is a reason why WTC tier list, the Team Sweden channel, Art of War putting Eldar at S tier. The army is strong. Even if it sits around a 50% win rate, the army is really, really strong. Now, the question is, based on the information we've kind of put together in this video, what is the point when an army is so strong that it needs to have nerfs applied to it? And especially significant nerfs. And I think we have to be really careful with armies that are sitting inside the healthy win rate band. And I think we're in a meta where it's really, really good now. We've got a balanced data slate coming. You may even be watching this video after the balanced data slate, but I see a lot of comments which are a little all over the place. If we take the Thousand Sons discussion, when the Codex first came out, Thousand Sons actually had a relatively mediocre win rate, but a lot of the discussion was about, no, they really have to be nerfed. They're way too good. Over time, people have realized Thousand Sons aren't actually that good. Their win rate has actually gone up, and the discussion is now about, really, maybe they shouldn't be nerfed. But the power of our discussions on Reddit, when we get a little bit emotional about it, can have an impact on actual game balance. So I would say that people should just tone it down a little bit if they can when it comes to armies that are sitting in a decent relative win rate, and wait and see a little bit before asking for things to be very heavily nerfed. Now, I have made a mistake with this in the past where I kind of went in a little hard on Guard, who had a super low win rate, but they were really good in our local UK meta. It's hard for me to know exactly where I stand on that one because they got some nerfs, but maybe a little bit too much in the end. Are they in a good balanced place? Hard to tell. Dave knows. Dave's still getting success. Nassim's still getting success out of them. But that's the same as saying Jack Hopster's really getting success out of Eldari, or John Lennon's really getting success out of Emperor's Children when the statistics don't match. It is a very hard and interesting topic to discuss. I made this video so that we could get a lot of discussion. There is so much that can be talked about when it comes to statistics. I would love it if I could hear your points of view on stats and how you use them when you discuss game balance. Maybe some of the toxic comments that you guys have seen on Reddit or YouTube comments about the way that people discuss data and information. And then, maybe over time we become more constructive with the way that we discuss balance as well. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. I talk loads about stats, the armies that we play, and competitive 40K in general on our Discord. So if you do want to join that community, which is really active, really positive, make sure to join the Discord level YouTube membership, which is the Phoenix Lord level. If you just want to see the members only videos, you can join at the base level, but I would definitely recommend the Discord level. You'll get a lot out of it, including open coaching and our TTS tournaments, which have prizes. So thank you all so much for listening, and as always, see you guys next time by the Fireside. Thank you for listening to the 40K Fireside. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, drop us a comment, check out the YouTube members area, and we look forward to seeing you again next time by the Fireside.